So next morning, got here early. I've already kind of made a start, as you've probably seen in the time-lapse video before this. Unfortunately, I've stuffed the tip and the electrode of my plasma cutter and I can't find my friggin' bag which had all the consumables in it here. So I'm hoping I can find it. It might still be at my parents' place, I don't know. It may be a showstopper if I cannot get a new tip and electrode, because trying to cut this all out with a grinder or even a Recipro would be such a nightmare. As you can see, I've already got this side pretty much done. Obviously just got to take this off and then just grind everything back. This will probably have to, focus. So this will probably just have to cut back, because this big bit here, the engine mount, is attached to it. So I'll probably just keep this and kind of box it in with the fish plate, I'm guessing. And then there's obviously stuff on the other side. I've already done one of the brackets there, so it's just that one to go and that thing over there, and then basically just grind it all out. So fingers crossed I can get some more consumables. I probably won't do much more time lapse. It's pretty boring shit just cutting stuff out, but I'll bring you guys back in once I've actually got some progress. I haven't got any fish plates or anything yet, so the next thing I'll probably look at is kind of looking at caster and pinion angle for the diff housing and kind of getting that in, getting the arms kind of mocked up as well. So we'll see how we go. Well, I'm sure you can probably tell by the cleanliness of my face. It's been a pretty dirty day today, but got some results. I've got everything cut out and everything's pretty well ground back. Got that little crack all welded up and ground back as well. I'm gonna have to obviously go further, but for now that'll do. All the welds and everything that needed grinding back are done. It'll just be a matter of getting rid of paint so I can weld the fish plate on once I get it. And same on the inside. It's a real prick of a job. There's no real easy way about it. Definitely I would recommend using the plasma cutter, and definitely worth getting one of these. So as you probably saw previously, my plasma cutter electrode was fucked and I couldn't find my bag which has the spares in it. So I went to Brett's place and grabbed his torch, which he had, we never used it, and he just had it for his welder and the consumables. So I came back and the nut that connects to the machine was smaller than my one. So I already wasted an hour going to his place. So basically what I ended up doing was saying, fuck it, I'll just buy myself a new torch. So I cut the hose off mine, and then it has the cable that goes through the hose on my one. So I've just kind of clamped all that to the brass body here. And it did the trick. There was only a small kind of air leak from there, but it got me out of trouble, because doing these friggin' things without a plasma cutter is, I almost wouldn't even bother, because it's such a shit fight. But in doing that, it's just meant that I can get all the dirty, grindy shit done today out of the way, then we're basically on to cleaner stuff. I do have to actually cut out the torsion bar rear mounts, but I'll do that later. So what I found worked pretty well for cutting all these bracketry and shit off was, hopefully I've got some photos, I'll try to throw some on the screen, but basically I would cut, you know, as close as possible to the chassis and as kind of parallel to the chassis as well, so I'm not gouging into the chassis rail. And then if after that bracket came off and I could grind a little bit more off with the cutoff wheel, I'd do that. And then I would come through with the grinding disc and just kind of grind it very close to the surface of the chassis rail. And then I'll come through with the flap disc and just do a final kind of clean up. So it's come out pretty good. Obviously there's going to be a nice steel fish plate over that. So yeah, I'm kind of thinking with this, I'll end up probably boxing this in. As you can kind of see, I've ground it back. The other side was a bit of a prick, so I couldn't get the grinder in. So I've kind of set up a guide with the plasma and just did a bit of a rough cut. I'll worry about that one later. And then you can see here the nice pile of garbage IFS bits. So I guess what I'll probably do next, well, obviously it's about 8 PM on a Sunday night, so I'll be pretty much cleaning up and going home and having some dinner. But the next thing is pretty much getting the car jigged up, everything kind of leveled out, sitting true, which then I can start to measure out stuff and figure out where the front axle is going to sit. So yeah, I should probably really go home. So one thing that I do want to check and kind of talk about, obviously I will go into this more as we get further into the build once the axle starts to go in, but I'm just curious what the kind of caster pinion angle separation is on this diff. So as you can see now, as you can hopefully see, the diff's probably sitting, well, the face of where the pumpkin bolts, which is kind of, you know, perpendicular to the output shaft flange, that would be sitting pretty well, you know, horizontally level, and obviously the flange would obviously be pretty plumb. Then you can probably see at your end the angle of where the kingpin goes through. So that is effectively your caster. So I'm going to be aiming for about 3 degrees. So positive caster is essentially like that. So kind of top, bottom, just basically a center line through the kingpin. And that's obviously the axis that the wheel rotates around. There's tons of videos that go into all the suspension geometry stuff, so I'm not going to go full into it, but you know, too little caster, it'll feel a bit floaty and boaty on the road. Too much caster, it'll feel very heavy to steer, but it will track nicely, and especially at higher speeds, it will kind of track nicely. Caster usually gives you that kind of feel where the car wants to keep, you take your hands off the wheel, the car wants to keep going straight. So obviously it's a fine line, especially on a four-wheel drive, because it has to do a few different kind of terrains and driving styles, but you know, somewhere around 3-4 degrees is normally pretty comfortable. But I'm just going to do a simple thing. Got a bit of angle iron and my digital angle finder. So what I will do is just kind of put that on there. So with the angle finder on the kingpin bearing race, which is basically square off the center line of that kingpin, which is about, which is the axis at which the wheel rotates about. It's about 11.75 degrees. So, you know, if we're aiming for 3 degrees, so let's say 3.9 degrees of caster there. And then we can go back over here to the kind of diff pinion, or what would be the pinion angle. And that's 7.65 degrees. So basically that's kind of showing us roughly how it's going to want to be sitting in the car. So we'll have, which is good, because there'll be a little bit of angle on the diff facing upwards. So it's got some good upward angle towards the transfer case. Obviously things may completely change by the time I actually get into the car, but that just gives us a bit of an idea what we're working with. So about 4 degrees at the kingpin, and 6-7 degrees at the diff pinion basically. So now I can go home. Alright, so I've just got the diff kind of mocked up on a panel stand under the car. I'm just trying to kind of get an idea on where everything's going to sit. So as you can see, I've got the laser level out, so thankfully obviously this is something I use on the reg being a builder, so I've got that. But I mean, if you don't have one, you could use like a plumb bob and pull a string through or something, the laser is obviously way nicer. So if you don't mind spending a few $100, it would be good to get at least a 2-axis, even 3-axis, which that is even better. But multiple ways to skin a cat. This is the way I'm going to do it. But yeah, like I said, multiple ways you can definitely adapt this. But basically what I'm doing is just trying to set up some, hopefully you can see, just trying to set up some datum marks and just check some measurements on the vehicle. So as you can see on the gearbox there, so what I did with that is I basically set my laser up from, there's a threaded hole here for the sway, I think that's a, yeah, they must have been the sway bar mounts. So the front thread there and the front thread on the other side, I ran the laser straight through them, and then halfway between the chassis rails, I've done a cross mark just on the box. So that's just one thing to check. I've also come through and measured, so this cross member is the same parallel distance from that same bolt hole as well on both sides. So I've set the laser up across that and then lined up with that mark. And then I've also done some checks further back between the chassis rails. So kind of just before that crossbar there. So the laser is pretty much within 1 mil of center across there. So I know that I'm kind of looking in the right spot. And then also a check measure from kind of center of this bolt hole to center of that bolt hole. The laser's in the middle. I've also put some tape and a mark on there. And then also at the front of the vehicle, got some tape here. And if you put the square on here and transfer that up, you can, oh, actually you probably can't see, it's a bit dark. All right, there we go. So if you put the square on there and kind of transfer it up, you can see that is basically bang on center of this hole in the front kind of cross member rad support. So I think we're pretty well looking good. So then also looking through, it's probably going to be hard for you guys to see, but it also lines up with basically center of my tow hitch on the rear bar, and also some other measurements back there confirm that it's pretty well in the center. So I'm pretty happy with these kind of datum measurements that I've got. You'll also notice that I've just bolted these upper control arms back in. That's just to kind of give me a check measure for where the center. So obviously center of the arch isn't that crucial. I'm going to play around with a few different things, and I probably will end up just kind of mock assembling the whole axle so that I can just check wheel clearance and everything. So I'm kind of thinking I want to be seeing center of the arches once the diff is kind of at close to full compression. So when it does come to a bump, obviously the arc of the radius arms will slightly pull the diff backwards as it goes up. So if you have your radius arm flat, for instance, at ride height, when it goes down it's going to pull backwards, and then also when it goes up it's going to pull backwards. So you just obviously want to make sure that under all suspension and turning circumstances you're not going to be hitting. So this is a chance where we can kind of move it forward potentially, but yeah, obviously there's a lot of things to check out. I'm just playing with some things at Savo, and yeah, I'm hoping to at least get some mounts kind of clamped or tacked to the chassis, and then we can start locating this diff, and yeah, I'll report back once I've got some progress. All right, so I'm making some progress. It's looking good. So what I've done here is I've just sat the wheel up. Basically, I can sight through the back of the chair here and see that's basically center of the axle. So this is just kind of giving me an idea on where the wheel is going to be sitting in the guard. So it's probably moved, I'd say probably 50 mil further forward than it was previously, which is good because we're gaining some overall kind of track length, which is good. The reason for that is because we're kind of governed by these brackets. So as you can hopefully see, it's too much shit in the way, but it's basically right up against the cross member. So that's pretty much as far back as I can go. I can trim a little bit off the there's about 20 mil there that I could trim off that bracket and push it back another 20. But I'm kind of inclined to somewhat keep it as far forward as possible. I'm not going to do anything for sure until I've actually got the coilover towers, which should hopefully be coming in tomorrow. So depending where they're going to sit for the coilover. But if we come around here, we can look at it better from this side. So you can kind of see there how it's all coming together. I mean, at this stage, I'm pretty happy with where it's sitting. So yeah, we'll jump under and have a look at a few more things. So you may have also noticed the threaded bar that goes between the two brackets. This is a pretty cool idea that Troy from TM Fab gave me. This is what he does when he does his kits. So it's just a bit of M16 threaded rod, and I've just kind of tightened each one to it at the right kind of width. And that obviously keeps them both kind of trued up, pointing the right way. And yeah, obviously everything moves together. So it's all working out pretty nice. The bar or the center line of the radius arms is like within 0.5 mil to the laser, so that's good. I've also measured from, it's not a very accurate measurement, but on the bottom bolt of the lower control arm up to the same point. And then I've also measured from the bolt on the, well, the top bolt of the lower control arm back to the laser and also to there, and we're within like 1.5 mil. Obviously it depends on the angle of the tape and everything like that, so I think we're pretty well in the ballpark. There's obviously some more play in the kind of the diff housing to these brackets, so you know, any slight discrepancies we can take up there, but I'm pretty confident with how these brackets are sitting. I really want to tack them in, but I don't know if I should until I've got coilover towers and can just check that everything's going to fit with the axle in its current position, because I might have to move it back a little bit, so we'll see. So I forgot to mention earlier, once I kind of worked out the center line, I've put a grinder mark in there and also a paint mark just so I can see it and line that up for center. So that's center of the diff, and that's obviously lined up center of chassis rails, and also check measures everywhere else as well. So that's the beauty of having the old laser. So I guess you can see here the kind of size discrepancy of the 80 series versus the 106 diff. So Matt did say to me, once I've kind of got this mocked up, to send him a drawing and he'll just get another set cut. I'm kind of thinking I might just make up some almost like bracing plates that fit snug to the axle tube, and then weld them on, and then weld them to this, and then weld this bracket on the inside wherever I can, and probably down at the bottom, so that way I won't be having to stuff around and get new brackets cut up and waiting for all that kind of stuff. So alright guys, bit of an update. I have a grown-ups jigsaw puzzle in the shop. So massive thanks to Troy at TM Fab. He's hooked us up with his whole Hilux SAS kit. So I'm just going to use what I can out of this. So obviously chassis plates, I think that's coilover mount stuff. There's a low profile cross member. I'm still obviously working out what all this stuff does. I might give Troy a call actually and just double check before I start putting stuff together. We've got radius arm mounts which may actually work. I think I might have to use them with that low profile cross member. But yeah, a whole bunch of stuff. So he freighted this down to us. I picked it up this morning. Yeah, this is the next step in getting things kind of welded on to the chassis. As you probably recall, I set the arms up the other day. So now I've got chassis plates and everything, or fish plates. I can obviously weld them on and start actually building this thing up. So yeah. Okay, so I've just finished welding up, well, the base of the passenger side radius arm chassis mount. So in order to use Troy's low profile cross member, I've got to use these, which is fine. So these basically locate on the factory cross member holes, which bolt there, which is kind of handy. You can kind of bolt it up and move it around and get it all set up properly, and then obviously weld it in. And then the low profile cross member can mount to any of these. So obviously depending on kind of how far back, if you've got twin cases with a gear drive or whatever, I'm guessing that's what he's got all the multiple holes for, which is handy. And also on the radius arm mount as well, it's got the 2 holes, so that's kind of handy. I'll show you under here. I've had to drop the car down, obviously because I had my hoist post on the cross member, so I've had to kind of drop it down. I had some jack stands there just to support it while I dropped the factory cross member out, and got all this kind of stuff rigged up. I've got some stands up the front there just for safety. It is still sitting on the hoist, so that's what's mainly carrying the car. That's just a fail-safe. So you can see down under here, this is the driver's side one. So you can see where it mounts with the factory bolts. And then the low profile cross member is just loosely attached to the box. Obviously the box is on the jack at the moment. So once the other side one cools down, I'll bolt that on and I can start to kind of measure all these with the laser and just see, I'll again kind of mock up where the diff will sit in here. It looks like they're going to basically be in the same spot. So with this, obviously I've got the choice of 2 different holes to go to. So yeah, I guess I'll kind of just go through again, get everything set up, reset kind of a center datum point because I've lost the one that was on the cross member, as you can see there. Just check everything with a laser and kind of get the diff set up, do some more checks. Now I've obviously got chassis fish plates and everything, so I might actually start welding them on. They're pretty easy to figure out where they've got to go. So yeah, that's where we're at. Okay, so I've just got the laser set up again, as you can see. Again, I'm just kind of using these sway bar captive threads in the chassis. These, as I measured last time, are very parallel with everything that kind of goes down the frame. So just crossing with that and then lining up with my marks, throwing a line down the center. The main thing is I'm going to be measuring on, I guess, we'll call it the x-axis. So I want to be kind of measuring everything parallel off some kind of datum. So with Troy's brackets, he's got a bit of kind of elongation in the holes, which is kind of handy. You can mount these up and get them all set up before you weld them in. So what I've done is just kind of got them set up, got the cross member kind of mocked up, so that's all kind of fitting where it's going to go. I just want to firstly check the squareness of the bracket to the laser. So we've got about 250 mil worth of width at the back. So I'll kind of measure on this corner and this corner, check that they're kind of situated properly that way, and also check basically centerline a bolt hole parallel to the laser, and we'll do the same on the other side. So we've got 720 and 720, so that's good. And then from center line of the furthest back bolt hole, we've got 494. So obviously the thing to be careful of when you're doing these measurements is you want to be holding your tape both square and level, whatever kind of measurement you're taking, make sure it's true, because obviously if you're dropping it up and down, this can vary, like, you know, within 5 to 10 mil. 495. Fuck, I've done something right. 720. Okay, well, there you go. I'm pretty confident with their orientation. So what I'll be able to do now is I'll probably use, it's behind the camera there, I've just got a little hacksaw. I might just kind of cut a line so I kind of know where the datum point's going to be, and then I can mark everything, grind the paint back where I need to weld. And another thing I need to probably do is there's some braces that kind of go from the top of the bracket up to the side of the chassis. So I need to get the jack, when I weld them, get the jack under this and make sure that the bracket isn't kind of rotating sideways. It's sitting nice and plumb and true, that I can weld the gussets on. And you know, once they're in the right spot, we are cooking with gas. Okay, so I figured I'd just give you guys a quick update. All the mounts are fabbed up, and you can see I've just put some, I've ground back the plug welds there and just put some weld through primer. So I just use the Worth weld through primer. This stuff seems to work pretty well. I definitely recommend this, especially for all your fish plates and just anything important, because obviously once you've welded it in, you're never going to get back in there. Obviously you don't know how well it works once it's welded up, but whatever precaution you can take, that's a bonus for me. So yeah, all welded, ready to go, nice and beefy. You'll probably notice as well that I'm TIG welding all this. The reason for that, I just prefer TIG welding. I'm much better at it, to be honest, as well. And also for this kind of 6mm plate, my MIG welder is kind of right on the limit, and it doesn't produce a very nice kind of weld. Well, not nice enough for my standards anyway, so much prefer the TIG. You know, it's probably a bit slower, but I'm in no rush. I'd rather just know that I've got some solid welds, and also they got to look good as well. All right, so you can probably see it better here. I've just, obviously before I pulled them off, I just put a grinder slot around the kind of perimeter of them where I could. And then obviously at the back as well. Then I've just come through and just, with the flap disc, just ground off back to bare metal where any supporting gussets and stuff are gonna be, and also where any of my welds are gonna be. And then I've also sprayed it with some weld through primer as well. So these are pretty well ready to be welded in. So I might get onto that now. I'll probably end up tacking them in with the MIG, and then if I can get the TIG torch in, I'll probably just run all the beads with the TIG. All right, so after suffering multiple burns from shit blowing off from the MIG, I've got these pretty well welded in. So I've done all the important bits. It's probably like 90% done on both sides. It's enough to get the cross member bolted back in. While I was doing those, to get access, I took the jack stand out of the middle. Then that ratchet strap there I was using to hold up the back of the transfer case, which was spanning between the torsion bar mounts at the back. So that worked well. Back on the mount now, so I'll have to fine tune the height. Thankfully I've got some bolts that are long enough, and then I can make some spaces up for them or whatever. So the main thing now is I want to get the car back down and sitting nice and level. I'll set the chassis up on some jack stands again, get the car sitting basically where it will be at ride height, and then we can get the front axle underneath again, set the laser up, double check our parallels and all our measurements, and then we can look at obviously tacking the radius arm mounts to the diff and just getting that all clocked up, tacked up, and then probably fish plates, get the coilover mounts on. So at least then I can get some measurements for coilovers and get them ordered, which I should hopefully have for next week. All right, well that's another day down. About to head home and have some dinner. I've got radius arm mounts welded to the chassis, as you've probably seen, I think. And also the fish plates on both sides are fully welded in. So I guess I'll let them cool down overnight. And I've just tacked up the coilover towers. I won't go too far into that yet because I'm still sussing things out. It is looking like we might have a potential clearancing issue for like the flipped arm and how Troy's got the coilovers set up. So I may have to do some modification. I don't know yet. I do need to cut out some of the inner guard to fit the coilover tower in just a little bit. So that'll probably be first thing tomorrow morning before I put the axle back under it again, start looking at things. Basically with a fresh mind, figure out where they're going to sit, mark it out, get that clearance so they can at least sit right back, and then I know kind of what clearances I'm dealing with. So fingers crossed. What I ended up doing with the fish plates was I burnt them all in with the MIG. Like I said before, my MIG's like just not powerful enough to do a decent enough bead. There's just not enough amperage, so it kind of gives a real kind of raised, ugly MIG weld. For thinner stuff, which is why I bought it, it works fine, but for kind of 6mm on 6mm, it's just too much thickness. So I buzzed it all in with that, basically the root pass. Then I just came through with the TIG and did, a capping pass. Just went over and smoothed it all out, made it look pretty nice. It seemed to work well. The MIG's definitely a lot nicer for this. It just throws a lot more material in a lot faster. But nonetheless, it's getting there. So I'll give you a quick look at the welds and then we'll pick this up tomorrow and hopefully get some coilover mounts in and get the diff kind of done. This is probably, apart from cutting all the old shit out, this is probably one of the most laborious jobs. And it's just slow because you've got to keep checking, you've got to get it all right. So yeah, I'm pretty happy. So here's a quick look at the passenger side fish plate. So when you go back over it with the TIG, it looks pretty nice. So that's all burnt in. Obviously we've got our slots there for the coilover tower. So I was actually just on the phone to Troy before and he sent me the wrong fish plate. This is the coil and shock one. So you can see the 3 spots and then they don't line up with the tabs on this. Unfortunately, I didn't realize that until after I welded it on. So it doesn't matter. I'll just cut the tab section off and just weld it in the right spot. And then, you know, gives me an excuse to do some plug welds in there onto the chassis for extra strength. And then there's obviously the panhard mount that's mocked up. I don't know how it's going to work with the diff. I may have to move that as well, but we'll find all that out tomorrow. So yeah, that's me for the day. I'm going to go home and we'll pick this up tomorrow.